On February 21st, 2024, Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble was revealed in a Nintendo Direct Partner Showcase. It was the first new mainline entry in the series in over a decade, with 200 new floors and a slew of brand new playable characters, alongside a brand new 16-player online mode. The fanbase rejoiced at what could potentially be the best game the series had seen since the GameCube, and honestly, I wasn't really feeling this one. The game looked fine and all, but it really just felt like a continuation of the Wii era of this series, complete with a newly added gimmick to enhance the gameplay, which makes me sad. I was hoping for a return to the simplicity of the first two games, especially with the success of Banana Mania seemingly introducing classic Monkey Ball to a new generation. And I really needed my Monkey Ball fix, man. It's been a whole 2 minutes since I last played Deluxe. So while everyone was enjoying Rumble and calling it peak or whatever, I began to search for something closer to the classics. I could play the numerous fan games that exist, and those are fun and all, but even at their best, they do lack the same sort of aesthetic charm that Monkey Ball brought to the table. No offense. What I really want is something that adds a cutesy animal protagonist, maybe something that better fits the rolling in a ball theme, like a hamster I guess. I also want it to be a trilogy of games, preferably with one of the games having a pointless product tie-in. Man, if only there was a series of games that meet this extremely specific set of requirements and I had access to it right now. Who is bothering me at this hour? What the... Hamster Heroes? I haven't heard of this before. Who designed this data? Oh, data design. What won't you release for money? If you somehow aren't aware of this company by now, then I envy you. They began as your run-of-the-mill trashy licensed game developer, making games like Jeopardy for Game Boy and other games of that caliber. Eventually, after developing Nickelodeon Party Blast in 2002, which got a ravenous 1 out of 10 from IGN, they had an epiphany. They don't need to put in work or effort to make money anymore, so they pivoted to making cash grab licensed trash for the PS2, working with world-renowned publishers like Phoenix Games and Blast Entertainment. If those names don't ring a bell, just know that they published games like Patenting Bear in 2007, or shocked Hollywood with their incredible talent in the art of storytelling.
What is it?
It's a gingerbread heart. See, there's even something written on it. Kiss me. Ugh, who wants to kiss you?
The point I'm trying to get across is that they're a bunch of hacks. Thankfully, for most of the 6th generation, their games are quarantined in Europe, safe from the rest of society for the most part, at least until the bomb dropped. Ah yes, the Wii. A great console that came with a deadly curse. The curse of shovelware.
Killing my brain cells. Like, I literally think I have like 3, maybe 4 left.
And with data design being one of the most shameless developers out there, they created their own fork of the renderware engine titled Gods, a name that would make the Unreal developers blush, to shovel out a near endless amount of supposed video games that reuse almost every asset from the games they had previously developed. They also decided to throw every single garbage game they had released early in the decade onto the Wii as well, just to truly milk the player base as much as possible. Unfortunately, it seemed to work, since most people know about data design due to the countless amount of videos that exist of people roasting the absolutely repugnant software they released on Nintendo's family-centric console.
This is the worst controlling game I've ever played. Seriously, it doesn't get worse than this.
And they are proud of how many of these abhorrent games they subjected the public to. In fact, if you check out their now defunct website on the Wayback Machine, you'll see how far gone they actually were. For example, peeking at the tab labeled Success, they try to outline their accomplishments, which consist of 5 publishers, 3 consoles, and a whopping 0 accolades. Listen, I hate to break it to you guys, but I wouldn't reserve bragging rights on getting a game published by Infogrames of all publishers. It almost makes me think that this page is a joke, and to be honest, the image of the snail whooshing me at the top of the page is really enforcing that idea. Best of all, if you head over to the gallery tab, it contains this inspiring quote that I think really sums up how data design sees themselves.
Ever had the feeling there was something you should know, but you don't know what it is? This may cause you to suffer from anxiety attacks of the extreme kind. For instance, not knowing about the great games we have developed. We're here to help you out of your misery by revealing some of the games developed by Data Design Interactive.
What a bunch of wankers. You know, it's very poetic that the first thing you see when you open a page that showcases their games is an image with the words extreme anxiety on prominent display. They're writing the jokes for me at that point. With all of that context, you won't be surprised to hear they got their fish and chips encrusted fingers all over more than just Hamster Heroes. And sadly, we have a full trilogy of games to dump into the ocean out of disrespect. How many British jokes can I make before part of my audience gets genuinely mad at me? I guess we'll find out. Besides, I imagine you could have probably guessed that I was a little hesitant to play these games, but Monkey Ball as a series was literally designed to be as simple to develop as possible, so I find it hard to believe that even a company as inept as Data Design could find a way to mess these up. I've also never seen any of these games in those previously mentioned videos tearing apart bad Data Design games, so despite every red flag imaginable, I decided to play them and see if they are just as bad as the rest of the company's catalog. Or maybe I stumbled across a hidden gem here. I doubt it, but hey, only one way to find out. I suppose the most logical place to start would be the first of the three, Hamster Heroes for the Wii. And the first thing you're probably thinking is, the controls must be awful. One of the main defining aspects of the original two Monkey Ball games is how the accuracy of the GameCube controller's joystick allowed for an unparalleled level of precision, which made them incredibly easy to understand for newcomers, and at the same time facilitated an almost endless skill ceiling to the most dedicated of players. So if Super Monkey Ball couldn't replicate that gameplay experience on the Wii, then I have no hope in Data Design pulling it off. But thankfully, there are PC versions of these games, so all I have to do is go on eBay and $60 shipping? Okay, well I guess I'm playing the Wii version. To start off, we can choose from 4 different player profiles, but these are a bit confusing. The first 3 are just the hamsters from the cover art, so that makes sense, but this 4th one? Let's just say I'm pretty sure there was a reason why this one isn't on the cover art. Let's just pretend I didn't see that and instead talk about the menu. It appears to be a blueprint with some floating hamster balls. Alright, I see the hamster part of the game just fine, but I'm not really sure what screams hero about this. Well, surely we must find that in the main cast of the game. This is something that Super Monkey Ball 1 excelled with. It may have only had 4 characters to choose from, but each one had a memorable and easy to remember name, and several defining characteristics that different players could attach themselves to. Ai is the cutesy main lead and the default boy character of the game. Mimi was the obvious girl character to foil Ai. Baby was both a fun, quirky addition to the team, and could also double as a younger brother kind of character. And Gong Gong was a strong, tough guy that was originally a villain to give him a little bit more depth in the first game. Overall, a great ensemble of characters that perfectly fit into the world of the game. So let's see what diverse and interesting crusaders of justice that Data Design came up with. Why is the first thing I see a dabbing hamster in an army uniform? I think maybe he's supposed to be raising one of his hands while doing a salute, but like, no, that's definitely dabbing. Moving past that, this cast is horrible. Sergeant Fluff and Super Hamster make enough sense, but then there's Hamster X. The bright red background, the menacing grin, the eye patch. He more closely resembles Mr. X than anything I would call a hero. I guess this would make him fit the role that Gong Gong filled in the first game, but I doubt that was the intention from the developers. Alright, that's all 4 characters. What do you mean I missed one? Ah, that's right. How could I forget the final character? Racism. Between this and a profile for Hamster, I think Data Design needs to reflect on how they view other cultures. But speaking of Data Design not understanding something, let's start playing the game itself. And while the controls are, interesting? Because you control this game with a single Wii remote, trying to be precise with your movement is quite difficult. So you'll find yourself being extra precise.
Alright, fine. I bought it, okay? I'm sorry, I just cannot play with controls that ungodly. You know, I could have bought actually good games for this money, but nope! Hamster Heroes! I hope you're happy.
On the bright side, the PC versions of these Data Design games actually come with a fair amount of benefits. For example, I can now play it on my 4K monitor, albeit with the cost of the text being teeny tiny. But the important part is that if you own one of those GameCube controller adapters, then you can play it the way the God's engine intended. Probably. Although, the PC version does come with one pretty irritating caveat: the program can only run in full screen, but the games themselves can only display in 4x3, meaning that the entire time I was playing these, from my point of view, the games looked like this. And since these are pretty rare PC conversions of shovelware, not even the widescreen gaming form could save me this time. There is an option to play the games in windowed mode, but it's locked to 40p, so thank you Data Design. Ultimately, for the sake of watchability, I've resized all of the gameplay back to normal, but just remember that these PC ports are indeed still fairly crusty.
With that being said, we got a proper version of the game and a proper controller. So let's try that again.
I mentioned it before, but the menu is really nothing special. For some reason, the PC version of this game goes really overboard with the amount of save slots you can use. You get 8 whole folders, each of which having 8 files you can choose from. Pretty bold of them to assume that I'll care enough about this game to use that many files, but at least there isn't Profile 4, so it's a net positive all around. As far as the layout itself, it has the basics you would expect: options, saving, credits, play game, yawn. But unlike the everyday design menus, I think the actual aesthetic is passable. The 3D text, the floating hamster balls, sure it's outdated, but on some deeper level I do find this menu somewhat reminiscent of ever licensed games of the PS2 era.
Now that I've given the game a little bit of credit, let's take some time to pause and appreciate the positive energy. Alright, I'm bored of that. Time for pain.
With this game being called Hamster Heroes, you would naturally imagine that there is some sort of engrossing story in order to justify the superhero branding of the game. I mean, this is a Super Monkey Ball clone, and Super Monkey Ball 2 had a killer story mode full of fun, wacky characters that tie the game together. What engaging plot will our fluffy heroes have to journey through today? That's pretty disappointing. While it may not have any straightforward narrative, that just means that the plot must be told through immersive environmental storytelling. It seems to take place in some sort of mad scientist lab, with all these test tubes, a microscope, and the periodic table on the wall, but aesthetically it's designed to look like a dungeon, with the stone walls and floors and the barred off windows. The map itself seems to be confused as well, since the room contains a giant power switch on the wall, even though it's clearly being lit with candles. Kind of contradictory, but I guess our scientist is also energy efficient. I also noticed this image of some Albert Einstein looking individual with a label underneath that labels it as Dad. Wait, so if he's the dad, then who's in charge of the lab? Unfortunately, aside from the occasional soundbite of screaming, the room appears to be void of any ever living being, meaning that Dad must be the owner of this lab, and thus the aforementioned Hamster Heroes. But why are they being forced to roll around in such a dingy lab setting? Well, there's this bookshelf on display here, and if you look closely you can read what it says on the spines. Inner Hamster, Victim, and The Killer in Me? Oh no, is this Dad individual some kind of hamster serial killer? He probably puts the hamsters through horrible experiments to try to create some ultimate hamster life form, so all of them must join forces to stop Dad and his evil deeds. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Let's just see how the next area of the game expands upon this. Wait, there's not another area? The single lab setting is the whole game? Super Monkey Ball 1 had 9 backgrounds, not even including the one used for the bonus rounds. Even the single one that Data Design created has obvious cut corners. Gotta love the journal with the cover pasted on all sides, and how you can see the edges of the background textures out the window. Well, okay, so the background sucks, and I'm guessing that the story I came up with is non-canon. Fine. Whatever. Who cares if the Bad Boon bathing scene was essential to the enjoyment of Super Monkey Ball 2? I suppose the story is technically not what really matters in a Monkey Ball game anyway. Cowards. As long as the gameplay itself is at least passable, then maybe I can get some enjoyment out of this. As I said earlier, the game is indeed a Super Monkey Ball clone. It has the signature
3, 2, 1, go!
At the start of every level, you roll around as an animal in a ball. The levels consist of a bunch of random platforms floating above the ground, and the level ends by entering some kind of gate. Yup, it's all here, and somehow, all of it was executed poorly. Well, for one, you might have noticed the lack of any background music. You might have assumed it was some sort of artistic design choice to add to the atmosphere, but no, it's just turned off by default in the sound settings. Although even when turned on, all we get is the default generic Data Design sound that they use in all their shovelware games, and it destroys what little tone that's present here, so you're probably better off without. The game agrees as well, since sometimes the application's volume would randomly set to 0, and I had to manually turn it back up in Windows sound settings, which is how you know we're dealing with quality software here. But that's not as important as the monkey in the room for even the main series. The controls. At first, they seemed fine. Weaving through smaller turns and moving at a moderate pace is a little awkward, but worked well enough. But eventually, a huge problem begins to rear its ugly head. Remember my video on Monkey Ball 1? Probably not. It was 5 years ago and bad, don't watch it. Well, in that video, I discussed several challenges that the player has to overcome throughout the game in order to succeed. And one of the most important is inertia. When you're trying to barrel through an obstacle course to beat the timer, sometimes you forget to slow down and end up careening over the edge. Yeah, that concept is Hamster Heroes. If you gain any amount of significant speed, then it will take a long time to slow down from it, which as you can probably imagine becomes very annoying. But it's more than just wonky inertia, the same issue makes turning just as awkward. As a result, the game feels less like the speedy and precise controls of Monkey Ball 1 and 2, but instead a game we have to move extremely cautiously. A good way to summarize this is to bring up Super Monkey Ball Jr. That game has very loose controls due to being a 3D game on the Game Boy Advance, and with it lacking an analog stick, the controls ended up being pretty stiff to ensure you could still roll long skinny pathways semi-reliably. Well, for lack of a better description, Hamster Heroes feels like if someone attempted to make a Game Boy Advanced port of Junior, if that makes any sense. which is really funny to think about. I guess maybe Day Design ripped off the wrong game. I wouldn't put it past them. Interestingly, the Wii version actually doesn't have this issue, although it's possible I just didn't notice due to how unbearable the motion controls already are. My best assumption as to why the controls are so odd is that it could be possible that the PC version was primarily calibrated for keyboard controls, since even when you have a controller plugged in and you select the controller option in a launcher, it still uses keyboard icons of the UI. But after trying out the PS2 version of this game in an emulator, it had the same wonky controls as the PC version. So no, I think it's just Day Design being themselves once again. Intentionally bad controls or not, the GameCube controller does help slightly, but it really doesn't make that much of a difference. The developers must have realized how awkward the controls are, since they added a very interesting feature for the time: camera controls. Despite the fact that the Super Monkey Ball series wouldn't see this feature added until 2012 in Banana Splits, and even then you had to be completely still to use it, the Day Design games had the feature from the very start. Granted, this is most likely due to older games using a copy and pasted engine. It was probably just easier to keep the feature in. Plus on PC, you don't have to hold down a button in order to move the camera, which makes it just as awkward to use as it was in Splits, but it's still something notable that I unfortunately need to praise the dev team for. So congratulations on doing one single thing correct in this game. That feeling won't last, since we still need to discuss the game's level design. The main thing that really makes the Monkey Ball game special is how simple the design of the game really is. Roll a ball into a goal. But what makes it memorable is the fact that the game is perfectly paced. Every level has a timer of either 30 or 60 seconds, which guarantees that every level doesn't linger for too long. It also makes the game a very tense experience, which is further helped by the live system. This awards players who can beat any of the difficulties without dying or using a continuing expert with the extra levels or higher score, encouraging players to improve at the game, leading to a very replayable and addicting gameplay loop. You are always on your toes, constantly needing to push yourself ever so forward in order to advance through the difficulties. Yeah, so Hamster Heroes removed both the live system and the timer, has no score system, and extra stages don't exist. So there goes any and all sense of replayability or accomplishment. Are the levels themselves any good at least? With this being made by a company infamous for lazy cash grabbing, you would have probably expected them to make a ton of basic levels ripping off Super Monkey Ball 1 for the GameCube and call it a day. But to my surprise, the levels are distinct and full of gimmicks, not unlike Monkey Ball 2, the far more ambitious sequel. And honestly, to give them a little bit of credit off the bat, I can't say that all of the level design here was necessarily bad. There's one where you need to use ramps to push a giant seesaw back and forth in order to cross gaps, a level where you need to knock down targets in order to create a bridge, and a gear level sort of similar to the one from Monkey Ball 1 except worse. Some genuinely interesting ideas here. Unfortunately, levels like that are very few and far between, with the majority of the floors being chock full of many design flaws. The first of which being the inertia problem I mentioned earlier. There are several levels with long straightaways, and combined with the stiff and hard to maneuver controls, it constantly leads to moments we need to slow down to a near stop just to avoid dying, even though it seems like those slopes were designed with speed in mind. The game compensates for this lack of speed control by placing constant speed bumps in the level, some of which quite literally just being floating pieces of land that you need to bump into to not overshoot drops, which to me just feels like solving an obvious control problem with a band-aid. In fact, a lot of levels feel thrown together with constant copy and pasted obstacles, moving objects that glitch out, and just a general lack of care and attention. Another good example are the slopes in this game. Instead of the smooth and fluid feeling inclines from something like the Raft or Cortex, good video essays cite multiple sources, there are no curved slopes of any kind, rather a series of sloped edges that try to mimic a curve, which feel awful to move across and leads to your hamster constantly bumping against the seams. A good example of this is a level where the goal is to go up a spiral, hit a box, ripped straight out of Party Blast, hello Jimmy Neutron, drop a platform, then simply roll back down. But since the floor is so jagged and awkward, it becomes a tedious exercise of trying to hobble your way up, and just feels wrong. But by far the worst level design trend in this game is the sheer audacity displayed by the length of some of the floors. Yeah, the lack of timer wasn't the developers being generous to a player, it was an excuse to design some of the most bloated and boring levels I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing. Like an incredibly boring auto-scoring stage that goes on for 2 whole minutes, and if you die at any point you need to restart the entire thing from the start. Those are always fun. Also a level we need to weave up and down between beams on a slope, resembling a stage like Floor Bend. And I'm a floor bent enthusiast myself. I think that the world would benefit by having more Monkey Ball levels like Floor Bent, but this version is sadly disappointing. The first half is fine. It begins with a very easy, forgiving version of the stage before going on to a harder variation of it afterwards. But for no reason at all, you also need to then roll along a bunch of basic winding paths for every 15 to 20 seconds. Just extra level padding that serves no function aside from wasting the player's time. Then some levels are just straight up lazy copy and pasted garbage. Oh hey, here's an obstacle that you climb up and then wait for it to rotate in order to continue. Let's just make the player do that over 8 times, that's a great level idea. But if you thought that all of those issues were bad enough, then there is one that combines all 3 into a truly unplayable abomination. Downhill corners. It begins with a pointless ramp staircase and a skinny weaving path. Then there's a ramp that you're meant to try to slowly descend while avoiding some holes. Except you actually end up falling too fast regardless of how much you fight the slope. So the only way to not speed off the edge is to purposely hit some of the holes in order to lose speed. But once you drop down the one hole you're actually supposed to, you reach a downward spiral. But as I already explained, these are extremely bumpy, and since it's angled downward, it's extremely easy to slip off. So you need to be extra careful as you lower. But as it turns out, the spiral leads to a giant ramp, so you need to gain speed here. And just trying to casually roll down at the very end has you just missed the platform. Okay, that's pretty irritating, but maybe you just need to go down to the bottom of the ramp and try to gain speed at an odd angle to make it. Well, because the game's awful turning combined with the ramp leaning against the curve, getting the angle required is almost impossible. So I ended up trying over and over again to get past the gap. And mind you, it takes at least a full minute to get back here every time, until I finally made it. Yes! Now I can finally move on to the next. Yeah, this was the one level I didn't beat. I consider myself someone who has a great deal of patience when it comes to bad games, but I do have a limit, and it's called Data's design. But levels like this shouldn't really matter as a whole, since this is just 1/4 out of dozens. Surely there is plenty of joy to be found in this game's 15 levels. 15! You heard that right, these con artists designed 15 levels, and that's it. As a point of reference, the Super Monkey Ball game for the Nokia N-Gage, the most bare bones one of them all, has 45 levels. So I don't understand why they decided to stop at such a low number. They half-heartedly tried to cover this up by separating each row of levels by difficulty. See, they say easy, average, and expert. This is like Monkey Ball, right? This brings us to the game's side modes. Now let's reflect back on what Super Monkey Ball brought to the table. Considering how rock solid the structure and gameplay loop was in the main game, arguably side modes weren't even necessary to begin with. But despite this, they decided to include 6 whole party games that add hundreds of hours of replayability and enhance the experience so much that the game would truly feel tainted had these not been. Yeah, you already know that this game contains absolutely none of those. Although what it does contain is a time attack mode for every stage. The concept is probably what you'd expect. A timer is at the top of the screen, and you need to beat the level within the time limit. Pretty standard. However, what time you achieve then becomes the length of time you have to beat the floor the second time around. Meaning that yes, this game actually promotes doing individual level speedruns of its terrible levels. But as much as it pains me to say this, it's actually kind of a welcome feature here, and I did have a bit of fun trying to cheese through as many of these levels as possible. Although, even with that being said, this isn't really praise for the game as much as it showcases how much my Monkey Ball brain rot has taken precedence over my judgment. But aside from that, there is one more game mode here, since one thing this game does have is simultaneous multiplayer. Finally, it's a feature that could directly rival something found in Super Monkey Ball. The ability to play all the levels in the game without competition mode, years before Banana Rumble would finally achieve this. All you need to do is plug in another controller during the character selection screen and prepare yourself to play through, 5 levels. Really? Just 5? I'm sorry, but I'm really struggling to understand why it's so few. I doubt it's a hardware issue since the Rapper Lord's gear level was included. Could you just not be bothered to make multiplayer work on the 10 ever poorly designed levels? You know what? It's not like it matters anyways. It's not like I can get someone else to play this with me. You would have better luck booting up some Banana Blitz minigames at that point. This game is truly terrible. It's a genuine waste of programming and renderware. I know that I brought up a few things that might seem appealing to any spherical primate fans that may be watching, but unless you have an exceptional level of patience and are somehow willing to pay money for a game with fewer floors than Monkey Ball Jr.'s golf mode, then you should probably avoid this one. I know I gave some praise to the game here and there, but those points are very trivial when compared to my overall time playing this. The level design is incredibly slapdash with little to no thought put into it most of the time. The presentation is horribly disjointed and barely even represents the basic themes of superheroes or hamsters or design for that matter. The controls are horribly sluggish and fight against you at every step of the process. Then when all ever expectations are shattered, the level count should serve as a sobering moment that makes you realize maybe I shouldn't be playing a knockoff of Super Monkey Ball made by Data Design of all people. You're better off paying $60 to ship this directly into a landfill instead. Well, unfortunately I never learned, so let's see if they improved upon their intellectual infringement with their next game, Habitrail Hamster Ball, a game that seemed to pick incredibly misleading screenshots for the back of the case. If I didn't know any better, I would have assumed that this is some sort of 3D adventure game. What does this blurb say? Hours of very frenzied fun. Well, at least I know a portion of my audience won't be clicking off now. Before I go over what's changed from the previous game, there is a pretty interesting update to our hamster main character. This game no longer uses the bizarre superhero theming. Instead, now we play as Herbie the hamster, mascot of Habitrail. Yep, this is a sponsored Monkey Ball clone. I'm not sure what aspect of the previous game really spoke to the executives for them to pay Data Design to make this, but I suppose if they didn't, then I never would have been aware of Habitrail as a company. So naturally, I dug up whatever I could find about them, and to be honest, I didn't find much. Aside from store listings for their products, which is to be expected, there is shockingly little info about this company. The website looks like it hasn't been updated in 15 years, and I guess they agreed, because in the middle of me editing this video, I just checked it, and it's gone. The website was taken down. And the extremely bare-bones excuse of a Wikipedia page features this very Data Design game prominently in the first paragraph. Not very impressive for a brand owned by the world's largest privately owned multinational pet products manufacturer and distributor, Hagen, whose logo is also found on various objects throughout the game. Okay, so if I can't really research them, I'll see if their cages are any good, since that would be the main thing they're obviously trying to market for this game. Let's see what these YouTubers have to say about them.
This right here is something that's very cheaply made, and I'm just gonna explain to you guys why it's not a very functional cage for hamsters and mice.
So this tube they didn't make even. I don't know what happened in production, but it doesn't fit together proper.
If we go to the side, this is a very leaky water bottle that leaked all over my bed when there was water inside of here.
Another issue with the wheel, they have these holes that go around in it, but it's large enough that it could possibly get a foot or toe caught in there and injure your hamster.
Air vents allow excellent air circulation. What? The ventilation right here, or lack of, will cause upper respiratory infections and problems and symptoms in your small animal. As you can see, that is it.
So the shape of it is deceiving. It looks like it's 4.5 inches, but it goes down on the sides, and then you have that wheel. You're literally going to be able to put 1/2 inch of bedding in order to not block this wheel.
It's not deep enough for them to actually make a burrow out of. And unfortunately, when we did get this enclosure, they had 1 inch of bedding, which definitely the past owners could have filled it all the way up, but they just didn't.
No matter how many of these pods you connect, at the end of the day, it's just never going to be large enough for a hamster to perform any natural behaviors or be happy.
Well then, I'm beginning to see why they partner with a company like Data Design. Even then, Herbie's existence as a mascot is somewhat dubious, since trying to research him leads to almost no relevant results aside from they are in this video game, which made me somewhat suspicious that they were made up just for this game, until I did some further digging and saw some Habitrail products that clearly have old Herbie standing right there. It appears that he primarily existed just to promote the Playground line of products, which is why many of these renders show Herbie doing various sports activities. Unfortunately for Herbie, these days he seemed to have succumbed to the same fate as old 2000s corporate mascots, and is now just a generic looking hamster, who in all likelihood is not even Herbie. Maybe he would have been a stronger mascot if they used more than one render of his face for any of the art. On the same topic, the other main part of the promotion is the Hamster Care Guide located in the main menu, which is a quick guide for understanding the basics of hamster care for any child who may be interested in owning one. I am not a hamster owner, so I can't speak on how accurate any of this information is, but I can critique the visual stylings of these slides. For one, the multicolored backgrounds combined with the constant use of yellow and red in the text is really hard on the eyes, and much the same with the fonts themselves. Using Comic Sans in default Arial text is already the laziest possible graphic design choice, but for some strange reason they can't seem to decide on what colors to use, so they just swap between them for both the text and the outline at complete random. Then they try to stylize the outline of the text on a few of the slides, and it ranges from a little gross to completely embarrassing, like the healthy treats text here. It looks like they tried to change the size of the word after the fact and they forgot that there was an outline. It looks horrible. My favorite creative choice here though is on page 7. If the image of the kid is cut off so close to the right of his face, then why did you use so much feathering here instead of just moving it one singular inch to the right? Why? Well, with graphic design like that, then the gameplay must be great this time around. And funnily enough, there are actually some significant improvements from Hamster Heroes. For one, this game actually contains 4 entirely separate level backgrounds, being different rooms of a house, which is a much more fitting setting for a game like this. Even if this bedroom blatantly copies what was outside the window from the last game, but hey, it's still progress. Each world, as I call them, has their own distinct level design motif as well. The bedroom world is focused around speed-oriented levels, featuring a lot of wide paths full of slopes with very little precision required. If you think that this would mean that the slopes work properly this time around, then kinda? The backyard is supposed to be your typical advanced mode in Monkey Ball, with a very polar adjacent looking level. Although honestly, it resembles Monkey Ball Adventure level design more than any of the classics, and it's pretty hit or miss, so it's not necessarily a good showcase of the game. The kitchen world is built around precision with some light puzzle solving. And hey, it even has ace representation, can't complain about that. The final world, the attic, is defined by giant set pieces for each of the floors. Whether you're scaling up a castle or a pirate ship, or somehow taking place in the attic of a house, there is some sort of big structure that you're required to scale, even if some of these don't really make sense, but we'll get back to that. Although the most striking element to me was how close this billboard is to their house. Imagine waking up every day to see this peering at you from outside your window. I hope this family is getting compensated for this intrusive advertising, because otherwise I'd sue. I do appreciate that they set this game in a house to really hone in on the pet hamster angle, but let's just say that the execution isn't going to give Chibi Robo a run for its money anytime soon. The graphics still look like an early Dreamcast title at best, with very little in terms of environmental detail, outside of the bedroom having the race car ground textures and some occasional stage obstacles. Nothing aside from the backgrounds themselves really give you any indication of anyone living here, let alone Herbie. Unless having giant floating toothbrushes in the kitchen is some kind of UK tradition I'm not aware of. Alright, so the presentation is marginally better. Was anything else improved this time around? Well, it seems like the controls have been tweaked a little bit, but better isn't the word I would necessarily use. To start, the inertia problem from the first game has been reduced severely. Instead of taking a lifetime to slow down, you can stop almost on a dime. Wow, that's a very appreciated change that greatly increases the playability and potential fun of the game. So what did they mess up in the process? For some reason, if you try to move directly left or right, you will barely scooch an inch. Every other direction on the controller works just fine, except for left and right. Now granted, it is possible that this is due to me using a GameCube controller, but this wasn't an issue with the last game, so I don't see what would have changed here. I probably shouldn't even be complaining about this, since it actually makes any level that requires precision significantly easier, and for a game like this, that cannot be discounted. Aside from that, it's still the same stiff and awkward game to control as last time, just much more playable.
Does this mean that it's a good game now?
I know that Hamster Heroes set the bar pretty low, but this is still a data design game we're talking about here. The main menu is almost copy and pasted directly from the previous game. There are still only 20 levels this time around, 8 of which being playable in multiplayer. It's technically an improvement, but that's like saying that waving a paper fan from the stern of a cruise liner technically makes it move through the water faster. But hey, it's apparently good enough to get its own bullet point on the back of the case. Okay, maybe the cast of characters is better this time. It's just Herbie in 4 different colored shirts like he's trying to cosplay as the Wiggles. I suppose it's better than the previous game on the virtue of not having that hamster back, but I'm not going to pretend that this isn't embarrassingly lazy. But Ninja, that's not Herbie, it's Gerby! Uh-huh, I believe you. Okay, well the levels have to be better this time, right? Well, before you can even select any, you'll see that they added easy and expert difficulty options, which seems odd since on the level select, the first row are all labeled easy. Then every other level after that are apparently expert, and this doesn't change regardless of what option you pick. So what's the point of having the option? we'll get back to that. But regarding the quality of the levels themselves, I wouldn't call them better as much as I would call them less demanding of the player. There is much less of a focus on puzzle solving this time around, and even when they do, it isn't exactly much of a brain teaser. There is a level in the backyard where you need to rotate bridges in order to roll across it to the goal, and a level in the kitchen that involves flipping switches. And I think that's it. The majority of the level design here is very basic, and when they aren't trying to plagiarize Monkey Ball level ideas, they're just placing random geometry down and hoping it ends up fun in the end. The attic is the biggest offender in this regard. I brought it up previously, but it literally feels like they ripped random objects they had lying around from a different game, then just added a bunch of signs to give it some sort of vague layout. You're not going to convince me that this even slightly belongs in this game. With this decrease in what I'll call ambition, as a whole, the levels in this game are mostly inoffensive across the board, which compared to some of the trash I played in Hamster Heroes, was appreciated. There was also much less padding in this game. It never felt like any level dragged on for any longer than 60 seconds. So yeah, overall I would say that the level design is much better than in Hamster Heroes. But let's be honest here, their design can't help themselves. So of course they once again found a way to get under my skin. May I introduce you to Twin Cobras, a level idea that might seem familiar to some of you watching. It's a pretty basic concept. You need to ride on 2 spirals of different sizes. Then you go up an incline and ride on top of both of them to reach the goal. Honestly, not a bad level idea. Super Monkey Ball 2 had a level involving a double spiral that I alluded to earlier, but only the bottom path led to the goal. So the top path was kind of a pointless gimmick there, aside from being a beginner's trap. So I was rooting for this level to be good from the start, at least until I reached the top of the final spiral, which is almost impossible to get across. It seems like no matter what time I dropped onto it or what angle I approached it from, I was always either slipping off or overshooting it, meaning that I had to roll along the same spirals 3 whole times per attempt. Thankfully, with enough trial and error, I did manage to barely finish this one, so I suppose even the worst levels in this game are still improved to some extent. But if you're looking for something truly baffling, let's back up to the easy and expert options I mentioned before. What do those do? Well, when I recorded the majority of the gameplay for this video, I played on easy mode. Then I tried out expert mode and I was shocked by what I found. Expert mode reverts the controls back to how they functioned in Hamster Heroes. Yes, really. No extra levels, no extra stage obstacles. They just decided to give the player worse controls than call it expert. What a lazy way to add a side mode. It doesn't even work since the levels were clearly designed with the new control scheme in mind. There is a level in the attic that's an obvious callback to Helix and Monkey Ball 2, and works fine enough with the easy control scheme assuming you move slow enough, but with the expert control scheme, it has to be unplayable. I can't even sort of stay on the path, and I can't imagine that the rest of the game would be any more playable with this control scheme. So the inclusion confuses me, and honestly only leads to a potential worse playing experience for new players, and should have just been cut from the game. So great job, day design. Overall, Habitrail Hamster Ball is an improvement over Hamster Heroes in a myriad of ways, but still falters pretty heavily in most regards. I can appreciate the improved controls and the more restrained level design this time around, but doesn't change the fact that the core of these games are still built on utter trash. And the still present lack of content or polish really detracts from what could have been at best a mediocre mobile game. It still feels like a pre-alpha build for a game like this, and considering how simplistic the mobile game genre already is, that's not acceptable. Sorry, day design, but no amount of Habitrail brand triangle treats are going to convince me that this game is worth anyone's time. Maybe third time's the charm, with good old Mythmaker's Orbs of Doom. This is easily the most well-known out of the day design Monkey Ball clones, likely due to it using the Mythmaker's name. What is that? Well, it was a very short-lived series that Day Design was attempting to start that was very clearly aimed at children. It has bright colors and a wide assortment of playable characters, but as you could probably expect, every single game was just the exact same copy and paste job as everything else they made, so they stopped it after 3 whole games and returned to their regular shtick. But hey, you know whatever series tried to appeal more towards children with a brighter and cartoony art style? Monkey Ball. Yeah, I should probably cover the elephant in the room, which is the fact that this game looks to be a ripoff of Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz. You know, one of the worst games in the entire series that was notoriously bad due to its finicky motion controls among other things, but it did sell quite well, so now we have Orbs of Doom. Great. So if even proper Monkey Ball was starting to falter the longer that the series continued, what does that entail for Day Design's hamster equivalent? Well, for one, the hamsters are gone completely. No more Herbie, no more Sergeant Fluff, and no more questionable profile images, thank God. They've been replaced with the typical Mythmaker's cast of characters, doubling the character count to 8 this time, all of which have unique character models and voice acting. Alright, that's a pretty good start off the bat. But at the same time, I feel like having the cast of characters be a group of stock holiday cartoon characters, and also the Tooth Fairy, just makes this concept make even less sense. At least with Habitrail and to a lesser extent Heroes, the Hamster in the Ball gimmick at least attempted to explain why we were rolling around on these random obstacle courses, since hamsters are stereotyped to play in giant plastic balls in real life. This game does a really bad job justifying why it needed to be a Monkey Ball clone, aside from the fact that, you know, Monkey Ball was a popular franchise at the time. Like, you couldn't even put them in those generic ball ornaments to make it Christmassy. Okay, maybe that's what they're trying to do with the ugly colors and the stripe on the ball, but is it really believable that they would add that level of detail, but not bother to write up even the bare minimum of plot details to explain that to the player?
Okay, here's my story. They wanted money.
The
They
end.
saw a Monkey Ball was popular on the Wii, and
They're like, what if we did that?
The closest we get is an excerpt from the back of the case, which implies that the characters are trying to escape the clutches of one sinister Rebus, presumably the individual featured on the front of the case. Okay, maybe the story has some parallels to Monkey Ball 2, where the monkeys need to complete Dr. Baboon's mazes in order to save the day. That would at least be something. Let's play a little game. Can you guess how many times Rebus is seen or even mentioned in the game itself? Yeah, I'm not surprised either. Let's move on. Since we're on game 3 at this point, and I imagine you're already wondering to yourself, how many levels did they make this time? Well, I'm gonna cut to the chase. 30. 5 more than last game. Man, they must have worked overtime in the office to achieve that. Half of the 5 level long worlds are now separated by the different holidays to match the characters, with them being Christmas Land, Easterville, and Halloween Town.
Speaking of which...
No. The other half being 2 worlds based on Mythmaker's Academy, and 1 being based on Teeth, because of course it is. This game begins with something rather interesting, a tutorial world set in the aforementioned Mythmaker's Academy. 5 basic floors containing very simplistic and sometimes non-existent obstacles to give the player time to get used to controls. It's even separated from the rest of the worlds in the level select menu to symbolize this. Wait, the name of the first level is Simple? I wonder where they got that idea from. Okay, but like, why even talk about something like this? In reality, this just means that 5 of the already very limited selection of levels are forgettable off the bat. While this is true, this is an example of good game design, since it considers the needs of new players. Plus, it is something that this game did better than the previous 2, and I get a feeling that this isn't going to be the case across the board. Speaking of which, good lord, what did they do to the controls? They reverted back to the loose controls from Hamster Heroes instead of retaining the slightly better ones from Habitrail? Why? But not only that, you're actually even looser this time, which I didn't even think was possible. It's not a good sign when I returned the Hamster Heroes to test this, and I actually felt a sense of relief at how much easier it was to control. No wonder they added those tutorial levels. They knew how terrible this game handled. Well, that was terrible. Maybe the levels themselves will leave more of a positive impression. If you were expecting some sort of refinement of the simplistic level pacing of the previous game, then you might be shocked to hear that it's completely gone here. In order to save time for both of us, rather than going through this game's different quote-unquote worlds one by one, I'll just focus on the 3 main level types you'll see in the game. The first type is one that's very self-explanatory, the Monkey Ball rip-off levels. Aside from the literal plagiarism, which I'll get to in a bit, these refer to levels that at the very least attempt to emulate the type of level seen in a proper Monkey Ball game. Mostly just the ones with some light puzzle solving or some gimmick that I found somewhat charming. But that's not what you care about. You want to see some shameless copying. We've seen some examples of these already throughout this video, but to this game's credit, there are only 2 main examples I could find while playing. The first one is Turning Spiral from the Halloween theme, which begins with this very original looking upward spiral, but it does have a second section, so I suppose they at least attempt something original with this. However, the second level, 4 tests, is as bland as it gets. So tell me if this sounds familiar. It's a level with a snowy level theme, where you use bridges to cross several round platforms that all have moving obstacles to dodge. Yep, just rip the level right out of Banana Blitz, no one will notice at all. In fact, this giant spinning top is more than likely ripped off from 2, so it's a double rip-off! There is another level in the snow world that has a striking resemblance to a floor from Monkey Ball N-Gage, but considering how obscure that game probably was at the time, and still is, I'm pretty sure it's a coincidence. The second type of level is the path levels. What I'm referring to are the levels that lack any real obstacles or puzzles, or are just otherwise incredibly forgettable. There are quite a few floors that just consist of you following the road ahead of you at a brisk pace to reach the goal, before you move on to the next level and forget what you just played. Occasionally these levels will throw in a hole you fall down, or rampant they're feeling crazy that day, but 9 times out of 10, these levels are close to worthless and only really exist to pad out the runtime. And they're the most plentiful type of level too. Honestly though, you might find yourself appreciating the more mediocre levels after you're forced to play something like this. That's right, the final level type is the game just peeling off the mask and trying to waste as much of your time as physically possible. Strap in folks, this is going to get very angry. There are levels that are auto scores just to waste your time. There are levels that weave back and forth endlessly to force you to play them slowly. There's a level that makes you go through an obstacle course just to push down one ramp to have to go through the entire stage a second time. Wow, great! Sure, Habitrail Hamster Ball had a level that required the player to waste time moving around bridges to continue, but it was 1 or 2 levels in an already short game. It was still scummy there, but in this game, it takes that concept to the stars, baby. You ever wanted to play a level where you go in a circle 4 times just to lower 3 bridges to make it up to the goal? No? You clearly want to play the exact same type of level, but instead you need to wait on a slowly spinning platform before each section, effectively making it an auto-scroller. The best part is when you die and restart from the very beginning, it gives you plenty of time to contemplate all the mysteries of life, like why did I decide to play this game? Or why are there candy canes in the Easter world? Seriously, they're on Morning 1 level and in Morning 1 game for that matter. Does the UK know what Easter is? They even had the gall to add a multi-level maze floor. Who hurt you, data design? And do we need to talk? But of course, there needs to be one bad level to root them all. One crowning jewel and awful that hurts me on a personal level. So I have the pleasure to introduce you to Drum, a 3D rotating maze. And it's as fun as it sounds. So now on top of the trial and error nature of floundering around a maze level, you get the added bonus of death if you happen to pick the wrong path. Not to mention that it rotates very slowly, and I mean slowly. So if you try to get a head start on the next section of the maze, or retain any amount of momentum, you're going to find yourself falling off a lot. This gives you more than enough time to notice how this level takes place inside of someone's mouth. Yep, you get the pleasure of rolling around on the slimy and horribly mangled tongue of some poor sap, who absolutely needs immediate medical attention considering how many pieces of candy are lodged amidst what remained of their taste buds. And yet, the agony they're currently experiencing is nothing compared to dying at any point during this god-forsaken level. If you make no mistakes at all, the level still takes 3 minutes and 22 seconds to beat. This is why they put in this particularly nasty drop right at the end of the level with a slope facing it. They want you to fall off like the sick and twisted individuals they are. I think it goes without saying that this is the worst floor in the entire game, and it really did test the absolute limit of my patience. As you could probably surmise by now, I am not a fan of this game. In fact, I don't really want to dignify this game by continuing to even talk about it, but unfortunately, we aren't done yet. There's actually more new content in this game besides its level count. For one, they added Star Challenge as an optional mode for each level. The goal is to collect 10 red stars scattered around in order to open up the gate at the end of the level, since it now has a comically large lock covering it if you don't. The mode itself, it's alright I guess. It's just a ripoff of the red coin stars from Mario 64, and some of the red stars are hidden fairly well considering how basic the level design is. Did I just soft lock? If it wasn't in this crusty day design engine, it would probably be decently fun. But what I want to focus on is everything around it. Isn't it interesting that this game mode in particular has a timer, score counter, and yellow stars you can collect in order to increase your score? You know, there is another game I can think of that includes these exact same features, and you might have heard of it. It's called Super Monkey Ball. For some reason, they programmed all of the usual features you'd expect in the series, then hid them in this random optional mode. Why? The main game would have benefited from these greatly in my opinion, but I suppose if you had a timer, then they couldn't artificially extend the level length for no reason. Plus, if you don't have lives, then the yellow stars don't really have much of a purpose outside of score, so might as well throw that away too. But you know, they could have just made a good game with lives, a timer, and score in the first place. But I guess that would go against one of their groundbreaking concepts that they tell on their website, so my bad. I've been talking about these games for so long, I can begin to feel my soul leaving my body, so we really need to wrap this up. Thankfully, there's only one more mode to discuss, multiplayer. You're probably asking, what did they do this time? Just increase the number of playable levels to 10? Well, yeah, they did, but the levels themselves aren't actually just direct rips from single player this time around. Instead, they are 10 completely unique path levels that you're supposed to race your friends through. Huh. I suppose this is probably better than the game forcing me and my friends to suffer through a 3D maze together, and it does mean that the stage count is now up to 40, which is certainly a higher number than 30. The level design is moderately better than the base game, with some, and I mean some, creative environmental theming. But as a whole, the floors aren't really worth writing home about. Well, aside from Seesaw, where the aforementioned Seesaw literally didn't work at all, meaning that, try as I must, I cannot get past the beginning of this floor. And trust me, I did try. So as a whole, I guess it's a D+ game mode at best. Wait, does this technically count as Monkey Race? Meaning that this game actually contains one singular minigame? No, it does not count. I hate this game. Whoever programmed it should feel ashamed. Everyone who published it should feel ashamed. Playing it was an hour of my life that I'll never get back. And honestly, that was likely less than the total development time for any of these supposed video games. Hamster Heroes and Habitrail Hamster Ball set the bar pretty low. I never felt as insulted playing either of those as I did playing Orbs of Doom. Herbie and his hamster brethren may not have been innocent, but at least they had idle animations. And you know what? At least those games were short. As scummy as it is, it meant that when they added a maze level, it was maybe 1 or 2 floors max. But Orbs of Doom took that concept and made it infinitely more insufferable. Every level just felt like padding upon more goddamn padding.
So in conclusion, this game sucks, this game sucks, and this game sucks. Wow, what a surprise! But thankfully, I will never have to play another data design game ever again. No longer will I be subject for another repugnant piece of software from this company.
Whoa, hold on a second there. Aren't you forgetting about something?
Oh no! It's a spy from the UK that data design sent to take me out!
No, I'm not a spy. In fact, you know exactly who I am.
Oh. Wait, you said I missed one of the games?
This right here is An American Tail, yet another game released by Data Design in 2007, but this time exclusively in PAL regions. So despite being a literal American tale, Americans aren't allowed to experience it. You can tell that Data Design were really scraping the bottom of the barrel with their license agreements here too, because the film this game is based on released all the way back in 1986, meaning that the gap between the film and the game is an absurd 21 years. You would have to be a pretty big fan of the series to have cared about this even when it came out. But all of that aside, maybe this game will actually turn out to be quite good. After all, the developers must have been passionate about the property to have made a game about it in the first place, right? Oh no. What we have here is basically a minigame compilation. Some levels have you falling down the screen with a parachute as you avoid washing blowing in the wind. There's a level where you need to follow someone to their hideout while not getting too close. There's a level where you need to run from left to right collecting cheese while avoiding horses and people walking around. A level where you ride a shoe on wheels down a sewer pipe. A level where you scare some cats off of a pier in a massive machine of some kind. And a particular highlight of the experience is this level, which has you flying on top of a bird and collecting items to replenish your constantly diminishing stamina meter to make it across a body of water. I swear this is probably one of the single worst things I've ever seen coming from the PS2. Look at this frame rate for God's sake, and look at the environment just popping into existence. It's not even just visual stuff that's a problem here either. The entire game has this weird floaty delay to the controls, so you sort of need to press things a second or so ahead of when you'd think to in order to compensate for the delay. This weird slipperiness is even worse than in Data Design's other games, so apparently they were just getting worse and worse somehow. But let's get serious. You're all here for some monkey ball action, so let's see it. The monkey ball portion of the game takes up the first 2 levels, and these are probably the best part of the entire thing. That doesn't actually mean that it's good by any means, but just that it's better than the absolute garbage that follows. So the first level that we've got is actually identical to the boat level from Habitrail Hamster Ball, only with slightly altered environmental details. But the actual level design itself is literally a one-to-one replica. Talk about lazy. The second level is actually a unique design though, and I have to say, ignoring the god-awful controls, lame sound design and lackluster graphics, I actually don't absolutely hate this. There's no timer like you would see in the normal Super Monkey Ball games, so the objective is to explore a fairly large level split into 3 sections and find the 3 blocks of cheese at the end of each section. Once you've found one of these, the level will organically loop you back to the center so that you can explore the other paths. Each path offers a different challenge, with one having you move blocks of wood to make a path to roll across, another one being a narrow platform which has moving obstacles which will attempt to knock you off of the stage if you're too slow, and the final path has you timing your movement to roll across gaps as some barrels will rise and fall in the water. There's a pretty generous checkpoint system so it never gets too annoying, and the time it takes to reset is almost instantaneous, which is nice. If the whole game had been based around this monkey ball concept instead of going off the rails and throwing whatever the hell this is into the mix, I feel like this game could have been okay. But instead, we're left with one single level that shows the slightest glint of promise, which it never expands on or revisits. Overall though, this is probably one of the worst PS2 games I have ever played. The only reason I can even see the tiniest amount of potential in the Monkey Ball level is because of how much I love the actual Monkey Ball games. For anyone else, even that would probably suck. So yeah, I would avoid this.
Wow, that looks to be just as terrible as older ever games. So I guess I'm glad it wasn't localized. Thank you for covering it, and sorry for calling you a spy earlier.
That's alright, I'm just glad that we definitely all absolutely agree that I'm not a spy sent to defend the UK from your onslaught. Definitely not. I mean, that would just be absolutely crazy, right? Anyway, you know what else is crazy? The fact that Data Design have been making these Monkey Ball clones since all the way back with Mythmaker's Orbs of Doom, released in 2004. In 2004. In 2004. 2004. 2004, 2004, 2004, 2004, 2000...
Can you stop?
Sorry.
That cannot be right. Orbs of Doom is the most obvious ripoff of Banana Blitz to ever exist. It couldn't have been released any earlier. In fact, I have the case right here, and it clearly says that the game was released in 2006. It's not like there's some blatant reference to Orbs of Doom and Habitrail that's currently staring down at me right now.
What is this? Orbs of Doom on PS2? 2003? That would mean that the other games came out after?
Wait. That cannot be correct. The PC port says 2006. Wait. Oh, they must have made the PC port at the same time as the Wii versions. That would explain why the order is all wrong. Wait, that would mean that as these games progressed, they got worse over time, meaning that every single ounce of credit I gave Data Design was null and void the whole time? They weren't slowly adding in levels per game, they were removing them. What a masterclass in design from the hardworking team that pulled together and made this happen. Why am I even surprised? Trusting Data Design to actually put in any modicum of effort was a poor judgment on my part. And when you buy any of their budget line of copy and pasted shovelware, you can't really be surprised when they turn out to be terrible. I should have expected nothing less from the company that brought us Ninja Bread Man, then Anubis 2, then Trixie and Toyland, then Rock'n'Roll Adventures. All games that were at one point a part of a pitch for Zool Free. But when Data Design didn't get the license, they just released each of the 4 worlds as standalone games, probably assuming that they had found a real-world infinite money glitch or something. A part of me wants to suspect that this was the case for all 3 of these Monkey Ball clones at one point, but considering the release dates and the Habitrail sponsorship on the second one, I doubt this was the case. But I don't know, something about these games still bother me. I understand that they were just a lazy cash grab and all, but even so, I have so many questions that were never answered. Like, why is there evidence of some sort of secondary villain in Orbs of Doom, even though it was just a basic Monkey Ball clone like the rest? Or why I couldn't find any evidence of the Habitrail triangle treats existing on the entire internet?
But after some digging, I managed to find something. No, not the treats, those still elude me, but a blog run by an artist that worked for Data Design.
The majority of it consists of concept art for the Data Design games that they had worked on in 2003, before they had fully transitioned into the shovelware company we know today. Which probably explains why this blog is pretty damn bare for a company that released well over 30 games within a 6-year time span. I suppose if I worked on that many projects in a short time span, I wouldn't have much worth showing off either. Although, to my delight, the Mythmaker series and Hamster Heroes are both featured here, and what I found was very revealing.
Although, I will preface this by saying that I've chosen to exclude this individual's name from this video because I've been pretty harsh to their work and I don't want anyone to go out and harass them. These games are 20 years old after all, and this is just a stupid YouTube video meant to entertain.
To start, it turns out that this one character seen in the loading screen for the multiplayer of Orbs of Doom, in the Wii version specifically, was actually part of a trio of servants to Lord Rebus, and the aforementioned Orbs of Doom are actually explained here as well. In fact, the more I looked through the concept art featured on this blog, the more I realized that the artist put in a lot of thought and effort into the world of Mythmakers, going as far as to create comic strips to better define the different personalities of the characters. Like this one, where Cupid turns two of the villain characters gay. Okay, I'll admit, I'm reading pretty deep into this extremely small second comic strip with no dialogue, like seriously, it's the size of a paperclip. But look, he fires his Cupid's arrow, it explodes on them with a ton of hearts around, and then both of them are giving these facial expressions with yet another heart on screen. I'm just saying, what conclusion would you draw from this? Anyway, the Hamster Heroes side of this is interesting as well. We finally get an answer to the mystery of the dabbing hamster from before. It turns out he was just leaning on the other hamster's arm. That doesn't really make any more sense, but it's nice to know what the answer is. Also, if we just uncrop this image, look, it's the Profile 4 hamster from earlier. Apparently they were just a cut character from this game. There are even various images showcasing the process of the artist removing this character, then later adding in the superhero one to replace it. It'll be okay, Profile 4 Hamster. I'm sure this will be the last time that this artist would draw questionable concept art depicting ever cultures for data design games. Anyway, there's even a blog post discussing a scrapped plot for Hamster Heroes. Ooh, this should be interesting.
The game in my initial concept was designed to be set in an animal experimentation lab where you played as the Hamster Heroes, out to rescue all the critters that were being kept trapped inside, kinda like a hamster A-team that rescued animals in need.
Wait a minute, isn't that the exact same plot I made up earlier in this video? Oh no, is this dad individual some kind of hamster serial killer? He probably puts the hamsters through horrible experiments to try to create some ultimate hamster life form, so all of them must join forces to stop dad and his evil deeds. It is! I promise I wrote that before I found this blog. So why isn't any of that in the game, or even the manual?
Unfortunately, the budget didn't allow for such a lavish game plot, and the concept turned into a monkey ball style game instead, with the characters trapped within hamster balls.
That checks out. And unfortunately, that seems to be the fate of any decent idea that data design comes up with. If it isn't compatible with any of the three separate gameplay styles that they repeat, then it's not worth doing. Which is a shame, since it's obvious to me through this blog that this artist genuinely did care about the games they worked on. And seeing it all trash because of data design's usual shenanigans is sad. But at the same time, we can find some solace in knowing that data design would eventually succumb to the fate of every Wii ShoWare developer and finally went defunct in 2012. Finally putting an end to any chances of them releasing yet another terrible Monkey Ball clone. You'll never know how peaceful it feels to know that I'm done talking about these forever, although that does raise the question of what happened to this artist. What fate befell the originator of Ninja Breadman? Based on what I could find, they did eventually end up leaving data design sometime in 2009, which was well past the point that they pretended to care. But believe it or not, this person is still in the gaming industry to this day. In fact, as recent as 2023, they were making art for online slot machines. Oh, perhaps including data design in your resume doesn't get you as far as you would think.
I can't say I was surprised by that conclusion, but despite all the info I found, there is still one mystery that eludes me.
If Orbs of Doom released in 2003, then how is it possible that it contains a level from Banana Blitz, down to the world theme? Is it possible that Sega themselves stole this level concept when designing Banana Blitz? Or was it simply a lucky guess? Well, since Data Design has been a dead company since 2012, we'll probably never know the correct answer.
But what if I did know the reason? Little did he know, I stuck behind Pixel's back and looked for the UK's secret databases, and it turns out that... Uh-oh. I think they found me, guys.
2004, 2004, 2004, 2004, 2004, 2000... Sorry.